Okay, so I am live. Normally I say we're live, but today is a special episode and that will continue on until tomorrow. So it's a solo episode. I'll be absolutely honest and open why that is. Um, Basically, my process of getting people as guests on, I'd overlooked the machine, the mechanics of it, and I'd let that slip a little bit. And I had some self belief in there that actually it would all work out. So from previous times, I've actually managed to fill the two accountable slots that I said that I would do every week. And then I realized late last week that actually I don't think I would have any guests. And I was just hoping that actually people would come on board. And then I realized, no, I'm just going to put pressure on to have guests onto today's episode. And why should I do that? And it actually, I've started to be very accountable for the things that I say that I'm going to do. I always have, but I've committed to doing these two LinkedIn lives a week. And I don't want to let myself down. I'm not letting anyone else down. I don't think there's no one holding me accountable outside of this room, basically. But that shows myself some integrity, how I want to show up. So I wanted to make this episode and tomorrow's episode, which is at 9 o'clock Luxembourg time, CET. Tomorrow's one will be more ask questions, but today you can ask questions. So if there's any people that are actually watching live, please just you can add just a comment, and then I'll see if I can get to those when it makes sense and see if I can answer some of those. If not, then tomorrow will be a good place. I'll talk a bit more about my journey through Vantage Point, and you can ask more questions as we go through that. But today, I want to sort of structure it and reflect back on this time so far. And it's very strange because when I started the idea of having these LinkedIn lives, it came through actually a course that I'd signed up for, and they suggested that we had LinkedIn lives and that you went live every week, once a week, and you built your audience to sell basically your product or service. And whilst I felt that was a good idea, um, for me it was about just having conversations, and that's something that I felt that I was pretty good at. And then through frustration, I basically didn't have a product or service to sell, and it felt very just very not very genuine to actually sell a product or service that I didn't fully believe in. So I went down the conversation route and just having conversations with people, and it's over 20 weeks now, and that's a lot of conversations, two a week. I've done previously two solo episodes which were pre-recorded and they weren't live. Um, that was through necessity because I wanted to have a week away holiday without taking my computer, and so they were pre-recorded. This is different. This is live. So as I say, you can send in any questions that you want, and I'll look to answer them. But looking back over that time, it's I keep a spreadsheet of all the people that I've had conversations with, um, just so that I've got that accountability to myself. I know maybe where there's weeks that I haven't got, the two guests planned, but I often scan through there, and time is going very quickly, and a lot of those conversations have been very deep, very interesting for me, and a lot of them have sort of opened up my mind, changed my beliefs on things. And I wanted to cover that today, and just talk about what I've changed my mind on. So I think there's lots of things. I would say that I'm quite an open-minded person. I can be very rigid in some regards, but in terms of listening to other people and taking on what they're saying, I'm quite open-minded, and I think that makes for an interesting exchange. And the the biggest belief. So I went for a walk before this, and I was trying to think what would be the most impactful thing. What's the biggest thing that has changed in my belief um, over this time? And I went back and forth in my mind, but the true answer is the belief in myself. Now, that might come across strange. It might be that people have this assumption that I've got it all worked out or that I know what I'm doing. But for a long time, I haven't. And I tried to start a few different businesses over the last 7, 8 years. I've tried to get things off the ground, a lot of frustration. Um, and I think a lot of it was about self belief, whether I could do it or not. I always looked at, I'm a big fan of YouTube, but then the algorithm sends you all these gurus and, amazing people. And it can make you feel quite terrible about yourself. It can be aspirational and it can be great, but the reality doesn't match up. These people are far, far ahead of you. And that can feel like such a big gap that it's unattainable for you. And I've often felt that way. And I grew up in I always thought of myself as a fat kid, but I wasn't fat. It was just I was just a bit chubby. So I lost weight. Um, didn't really stand out in any way. Was fairly average. Had a nice upbringing. No, nothing untoward. But I didn't really believe in myself. I had an older brother, and he was my idol. I think I've probably mentioned him a few times on here. And I always thought that other people were better than me. I always looked around and didn't matter what it was, there was always someone above. And I didn't really give myself the self-love, the self-belief in myself. And that's really, and something's shifted over the last, I'd say, 6 months. So just prior to going into this, I started to think, yeah, I can do it, or I want to do it, or and lean into some of those skills that I've got. And I've talked about this before, but oftentimes we think that we have, well, sorry, we don't think that we've got actually skills, because the things that were actually very easy for us, because they're so easy, we overlook them. And because of that, we don't really lean into them. So it was about picking up the signals from other people, and I started to pay attention to what people were saying. I had a coach. She was very helpful for me to understand, okay, I do have a skill set. I was good at communicating. I have a way of interacting with people that is very engaging for people. It might be a bit slow for some others and quite measured, but actually it was a skill. Now, as a kid, I remember being that squeaky voice on the tape recorder and didn't really believe that I was very good at speaking or the way that I sounded. I um, I was told in work once that my voice was very monotone and wasn't very good for communication. And I thought all of these things were the exact opposite, and I didn't believe that I had anything credible um, that people would be interested in. But what I do have, and I've realized this now, is the ability to listen and the ability to communicate and the ability to articulate things that are going on. And I often see things that people don't, other people don't see. And again, I didn't realize that people didn't see them. And because because it came so easy to me, I just assumed other people were doing it. And because of that, because I didn't have the conversation, I thought everyone else was doing it. So there's nothing special about me. But through these conversations, through people saying, okay, you're good, and then actually proving it to myself. So part of Vantage Point was actually an experiment just to see if I could have conversations. And I knew I could hold conversations. I've done it previously in my other jobs. I wasn't that bothered about being on camera, excuse me, which, for many of you, it sounds a bit strange that, someone who probably suffered about talking, maybe some self-images, how can I stand to be on camera? But I actually like it. It's not really an issue for me. And because I don't mind seeing myself on camera, actually, one of the things I think a lot of people do is they get in their head and they worry about what they look like or what they come across as. And that perfectionist side takes over. And I've done a lot of practice on that. I've tried, I've tested, I've done a YouTube channel where I was posting every week. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. You can't fake a live, can you? So, and I practice all of this, and I just got better at it, and I enjoyed doing it. And because I enjoyed it, I think people felt that. And excuse me, one more coughing. Apologies. I hope that that cough didn't come across on the sound. I did try and mute the microphone. Um, yeah, so I lent into it and I started to enjoy myself. And that slowly built up this muscle of confidence in what I was doing and how I was doing it. And that started to build this self-belief. Now that self-belief is just takes a little bit of time, but through conversations and through testing and through doing 2 conversations a week, I started to get feedback, not just from myself or how I thought things, but from other people. And I started to realize, yes, I am good at those things. Now, I think where I've struggled before is that I was looking at other people and they seemed like high achievers. They could do all of these things, multiple things. And I rated myself against everybody else. Now, I don't do that anymore when I can help it. So I will always caveat that I am no expert in any of these things. I'm just learning as I'm going. Um, but I really try just to be okay with who I am. And I remember having this conversation a couple of weeks ago. I think ever since I was a kid, I would I always wanted to be someone else or look a different way or be more attractive or this and that. But I was having this conversation and I said, I don't want to be anyone else. I want to be exactly me. I want to have had all the experiences that I've had, and I don't want to be anyone else. That's a powerful moment. That's a powerful shift because when you realize that you want to be you and you're happy with your life, everything feels freer and you go, okay, I'm going to test it. I'm going to see what that's like. And you're just very much more accepting of yourself. And that frees up so much for you to experiment, to enjoy, for people to feel welcomed into your world. And I think that's what a lot of people feel because when I've invited guests on, I've said this before, there's only a few people that have said no. And they've either said no due to um, they're busy or that actually my channel or following wasn't that great and they were looking for higher audiences, which I absolutely am fine with. But most people are happy to come and have a conversation. And for me to be able to facilitate that, I think goes a long way. And it becomes this circle. I think we do this oftentimes in a negative way, but this circle actually works in the opposite way that I start doing something, I test it, and I get feedback, and I go, "Oh, okay, is that good? Do I like it?" And I keep going. And all of a sudden, you realize that you've built up this level of confidence, and it's remarkable how quick that goes. We think the time runs very quickly, and yes, it does. But if I look back from when I started these conversations and how I am now, it's everything is just a tweak, the lighting that I'm using, the setup, the camera, the microphone, how I would show up, how I would prepare, etc. I just tweaked these things as we went along, and it seems to be working well for me. And that builds a confidence, that muscle, that self-belief that I can do it. Where this takes me, I have no idea. I have no plan, and I've talked about this before. I used to spend a lot of time living in the future. I used to think when I have this or I get this, then I will feel this way. But now I don't. I just choose to feel grateful for what I'm doing, grateful for the guests that I'm having, the conversations, the openness, the ability for people to connect and have those great conversations. There is nothing else I would rather be doing now. And that makes it so much more appealing to do, and I just get to enjoy it. And why would I want to do anything else? And I remember having this conversation with David Holland as one of the guests. He said to me, would you do this if you didn't get paid? And I don't get paid for this. This is self-funded, and I know I'm very fortunate to be in a position where that is. But absolutely, if I won the lottery tomorrow, there's no way I'm giving this up. It's too enjoyable. I get so much out of it. I'm learning and I'm connecting. This is a fundamental for me. So where it takes me, I have no idea. At the end of July in 2026, we'll see where it goes. But I'm starting to see things taking off. I I stream this to LinkedIn, but I also stream it to YouTube and Instagram. I did that just as a way to leverage um, basically the same conversation onto different platforms. I don't spend any time on Instagram really. I don't really understand how it works. YouTube a little bit, but actually I've seen some traction just start recently with the posts that I've been doing. And there are all these signals, and I think if you look out for them, you can go, okay. And they don't always come thick and fast. And I think we live in a world where we want instant results and things to come very quickly. But you know what? Time does move quickly. You can't wake up one morning and everything's exploded, but things do shift. You just have to give it a little bit more time. And I think giving it more time comes through a self-belief that I'm going to try and do this for a year, and just believe that it's going to be fun and that I'm okay. So I've set my budget. I know what my cost is going to be. I'm going to burn through money, absolutely. But where else would I ever get to do that? If I worked for another corporate, I would be doing something that someone else wanted, and I would have to do this on the side. And I don't want to do that. I've got two young kids that I absolutely adore, but they also take up quite a lot of headspace, and they do want my time, and I want to be there for them during these years and make sure that I learn to be a good dad, and I'm involved in their lives. So I don't want to do all these other things. I want to focus on this. And that self-belief that I'm going to do it cannot often come across as selfish, but it's for a year, and I want to see what the result is. So that's my first belief. The second one is around niches. So as I said to you before, I have tried a number of businesses before. And so in doing that, I have signed up for a number of courses, and I've had coaches, etc. And one of the things that comes up all the time is find your niche. Now, I have also spoken to many people on LinkedIn, mainly coaches or people helping others, consultants, etc. And some of them I can see really have a very good following, and just the dialogue between us. And I'm always curious what's working for other people. And the ones that seem very successful have defined their niche, very specific, and things have taken off for them. And they say that was the pivotal moment for them. However, I think the idea of a niche and defining your niche is exceedingly difficult. I have found it incredibly hard in every single business that I've done. Now, I don't believe that we should not niche. I believe we should absolutely niche. But I think we put that as too much of a priority. And I think especially for businesses that are just starting out, and when I say just starting out, that can be for many years, you don't actually know what your client is unless you're really actively, clearly defining it for one specific person. And I would suggest if you know who that niche is, then you've already been in that world. But most of the time, people are starting brand new things, and they think they're going to do it for one area. But the reality for me is that I don't have a niche, and it always frustrated me because it felt like I had to make a decision and then I had to stick with that. And I didn't know how to define my niche. And it's not that I don't understand the idea of how to do it and focus on it, but there are so many different niches. There are so many things that I am going to continue this journey and then later on define my niche. I'm not worried about it. I don't If you ask me what my niche is, I have no idea. I don't want to limit it in terms of the type of conversations I'm having, the type of people I'm having conversations with, the audience that I'm reaching out to. And even with that, you can get that wrong, because the way my works is that I connect with 20 people on LinkedIn every day. Whether they accept my request or not, I do that, which was part of the reason that my guest didn't actually materialize in the end. But I started looking at founders and connecting with founders, and I was doing that because originally I wanted to create a consultancy that helped leaders connect with their people. And so I just started connecting with founders, CEOs, etc. But I don't know that that's the right audience. I have no way of knowing. I don't know until I start getting enough feedback, and that feedback takes time. So um, the people that I speak to, the guests that I bring on, I ask them if they can invite their following as well, just so we can share in their audience and that I can share it in theirs. So they can share in mine and I can share in theirs. And through that, you start to maybe make other connections. But there's no one niche that I can see materializing yet. And I have no way of defining that. But ultimately, what everyone seems to sell you is define your niche right at the beginning. But why? You have no data, you have no um, insight, and you're going to limit yourself. And that might seem, I've heard this expression before, if everyone's your customer, no one's your customer. Okay, but how are you going to know what your customer is? And I don't have anything to sell yet. I don't know what this is going to evolve into. So why do I need to niche? Until it becomes obvious what I'm trying to do, I will absolutely do it. But I will not do it until a point where I think it's absolutely necessary or it's clear, abundantly clear for me to do that. And I think for those of you in a business and you've already defined your niche and that's working for you, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But for those of you who are maybe using that as an excuse not to get started because you don't know your niche, or have got caught and there's no traction because your niche is maybe too defined, let go of that niche and just see what goes. You can always come back, you can niche down later, but give yourself some freedom, some flexibility, because we don't know. Oftentimes the feedback will define your niche. But if you're trying to do that up front based on assumptions, I think that's very difficult. The only people, like I said, would be good at doing this would be people that have already been in an industry and they've maybe broken off from that industry and they already know their clients and they're servicing those, but they already have an existing client base and their focus is that way. I don't believe that's how most companies or people that are starting businesses today actually necessarily think about. So that's my belief number 2. Now, the third one is education. Now, it's something that's been sitting in the back of my mind for a long time. And I've had a number of conversations with people. And I recently had a conversation with a lady called Michelle Fulia, I think her surname is. And she homeschooled her 3 children. And the reason she did that was that her first child was about 8 years old. And I think he was being bullied or something wasn't quite right at school. And in that conversation, it made me realize that I had some assumptions about how things were. And I thought in the US, homeschooling was a possibility. I didn't know it was a possibility in the UK. And I think from a society perspective, we think, okay, school is the only answer. But through conversations with adults, I'm actually realizing how much help we actually need as a society. maybe missing, what we're not talking about. I know certainly this conversation around money is something very big, and I think it drives a lot of our decisions, and it's not actually about money itself. It's more around what it means, the emotional attachment, the blockages for getting money. So I had a conversation with Victoria Brennan, and it was very interesting because it's about our self beliefs, how we're linked to money, and we often think, oh, if we've got a little bit of money, no, I'm not bad with money. But what happens if you could break free of all that? And I think these conversations with these people, even I'm thinking about relationship. So I spoke to Carla. She was a relationship expert, and all this emotional intelligence, this ability to cut the noise out of our lives. And through these conversations with adults about adults, I realized that we're missing something in our education system. I think, and most of the people are around my age, maybe a little bit younger, a bit older. There might be a few exceptions to that rule, but ultimately, I think people of my generation already suffer with some of some of the things that we weren't taught in school, and I feel that there's a lot of kids that are struggling even more, and things that aren't actually talked about. So emotional intelligence, physical activity, you know, money, and I want to say entrepreneurship, and just different ways of thinking. So the way that we design, teaching, there's a teacher and then there's 20, 30 kids in a class, and by a numbers game that those kids sort of will take that information on. But I think how the world is and how the world is heading, I think we can't get to the answers that we need by being taught in the same way. Now, this isn't a slant at the education system. It was designed for certain reasons, and I know teachers are doing an amazing job. But I think the way that we learn and the the things that we actually could be doing better are taken away from us at an early stage. Excuse me. And I think some of my best ideas have come through play, through fun and enjoyment, and not being limited by what other people think, or you barriers that are there. Excuse me. But in reality, when I play with my kids, they often come up with some creative ideas, and they look at situations not only from a physical lower down level, but also just like a creative side, and they come they come up with some wonderful ideas and how they approach things, and they do it super fast. And I I think we take that away from our children. I think, even if I look at my education, it was about doing maths, science, English, etc. And we're taught the same way, almost like parrot fashion. And we're never really encouraged to go and experiment with these things in a different way. I was speaking to one of my guests, and he said he absolutely hated mathematics, but he's really into drumming. And so he said there's a lot of relationship between music and mathematics. Had he have been taught mathematics and music could be combined, then he said I would have learned so much better. And I that those sort of things stick with me a lot, because the more people I come across, I think the idea of creativity, autonomy, is taken away from us from a school level, but also university and from a work level. And whenever I've seen someone be allowed to be themselves to their job, they bring so much more. Now, if you apply that to the logic of children, Why are we allowing the kids to go through a school system that sort of really narrows them down, um, and takes away a lot of that fun and that play just to get to a to a later education like university? Now, one of the things that stuck out with my conversation with Michelle was that I assumed that you needed grades from school, excuse me, in order to get to university. And one of the things she told me was, no, actually, her son got into a law school or a law degree, and he'd never done it before. But what actually accounted for more was his extracurricular activity. Yet, what I was told in school is that absolutely you cannot get into university if you do not have these type of grades. And so I think the world of education needs to be changed, for the better for everybody, for teachers, allow them to teach in a different way, in a different style, for our kids to take um, that um, that rigidness and the way that they learn, and maybe teach us, and come up with new ways of learning, of teaching, of taking it in. And if I say scoring, we have this pass fail relationship, and I think I've struggled with that before, and especially in business, it's always pass fail. And I've talked about this before, in that most of the things that I'm doing at the moment are experiments. I'm experimenting with my time, my energy, how I show up, who I am, everything. And for me, that experimenting doesn't mean pass fail. It just gives you a result. And you go, yeah, it worked. And so, did it work enough that I would want to continue? Yes. Okay, cool. If it doesn't, what needs to be tweaked? What needs to be changed? And that also makes it playful, and it makes a learning, because if you approach it from a way of, yeah, you're going to pass fail, fail just is easy to internalize and say, oh, I didn't do well. And oftentimes, especially in the world of work, it's, oh, there's a punishment or there's a problem. But I think of companies like Dyson. There's, for those of you, the Dyson vacuum cleaner, and I've heard a lot about James Dyson's, and I'm sure he's got opinions or doing things that not everyone would agree with, but he has this idea of experimenting, and I think he that comes through in his company, and he started his own university, and I think that's a very interesting way, because it's just not throwing everything out. It's just, okay, just how do I make this better, just one more step at a time, and then you come up with other things. And I think if we approach all of that in the education system, something similar, and I do not have the answers. I am also here today with my kids still going into school. I think something needs to change. I don't know what that is or how that is. And I know that's a tough thing to change around, but I don't. I think there's a lot of pressure on kids, and we're removing the ability to play and be creative. I think that shows up in adults, and I think we have expectations, or I think when we get into our 40s, we start to see, we've closed a part of us off. And I've often seen this in conversations around creativity. A lot of conversations I've had, I've said, oh, like, to people, oh, you're creative, and they're like, no, I'm not, because they were told something when they were younger by parents or teachers or something like that, and they've taken that in a young age and then shut that part of themselves off. And actually, that comes out in the end, but it has to sort of fight to come out. And I don't think, it's great when it comes out, but I think there's a lot of people out there that don't have this ability to, allow that thing to come out. They kind of suppress it, and I think that's very sad. If you get to the end of your life and there's a thing that wants to come out, of a gift that you have, but you're told to switch that off. So I think if we can start changing how things are at a lower level and an earlier age with the kids, I think that would be much better. So just 1 second while I pause for a drink. Okay, so they're my three beliefs. So the first one was the belief in myself. I don't think we can underrate having a belief in ourselves because, all of this can get taken away from me. But that belief in myself, that foundation, that really concrete belief in myself is something that I think will pay off in the future. Two, defining niche. Absolutely, I can see that there's success in defining your niche, but make it actually later on in the process. Don't allow it to stop you, and allow your audience almost to define what your niche is, but don't go in too quickly with that niche unless you know specifically who your clients are. And then finally, the education side of things. How how we do things does need to change if we want to solve the world's problems and think differently. Then we need younger people, and there's a lot of pressure I'm putting there on younger people to think differently. And we won't think differently if we go through the same educational system that we went through as adults, and we come out the other side with that limiting beliefs about certain things or switching parts off. Because I remember hearing this quote that you don't solve the problem with the same thinking as you created them, something like that from Einstein. So I'm sorry to have butchered that quote, but you need to have a different frame of mind, a different way of thinking about it, because the way that you're seeing that problem um, won't have the same solution. It needs to be thought from a different angle. So they're my beliefs. And I just want to switch a bit more onto reflecting on the people that I've spoken to. So I don't have the opportunity to list all the people that I've spoken to here. So we're talking 40 guests, if not a bit more, 2 a week. And I just want to express my huge gratitude to you. So if you get to watch this video, I cannot list you all out. It's not because I don't want to, it's just that's a big, big, long list. And I want to say thank you because when I started this, I didn't know that it was going to work. And often suffered with the idea of being rejected as a child. But when I started this, I found that people wanted to connect, they wanted to talk. I didn't have to sell them on the idea of doing a LinkedIn Live. They were very open. And through people sharing their time, their experiences, their knowledge, and wisdom, I've been able to have these amazing conversations with people all around the world that I would never ever get to come in contact with on a daily basis. I'm based in Luxembourg. I'm from the UK. In my jobs before, it would only be the clients that I would speak to or the people around me, very limited. Now I get to speak to people all around the world, and I'm building relationships with these people. And that might not, that might take a bit longer. But I have this feeling, if I go traveling the world, I will absolutely knock on people's door and go and see them because they've given me their time. They've given me conversations, and I'd love to be able to see them face to face and, maybe buy them a drink or go for a coffee or a meal. And I'm hugely grateful for that because none of this would have been possible without you. Um, you know who you are. You can go back and look at my LinkedIn featured section for you see all those people that I've had those conversations with. And those people have opened up my eyes. They've allowed me to enter into their world. They've shared their knowledge. And that's amazing. To all of my lives are pretty much an hour long, if not longer. Um, and to have those conversations all under enjoyable circumstances, allowing their personalities to come out, allowing me to understand some of their insights and wisdom. Now, I'm naturally curious. I love people. That doesn't mean I love people all the time. I have to often explain this that, I don't need people in my life every minute of every day. I'm not a social butterfly. by any stretch of the imagination. Excuse me. But I am very interested in people. I'm interested in self development. I'm interested in what makes people tick, what drives people. And that's endlessly fascinating. And I think that's what makes this so enjoyable for me. I think that's what allows the conversations to flow and be very passionate. And I've always said that people might not actually watch this. They might just be listening, when they're, driving home or on their commute or, maybe when they're cooking or just for a moment. That's fine. I think you can feel more of the conversation than you can sort of see it. And people showing up, giving me their best, and having those conversations means that I get to do it more because the more people see that. And I had a very nice reflection the other day for an upcoming guest, and she mentioned to me she liked the style. Now, at certain stages through my journey, people have advised me that actually podcasting it should be done a lot shorter and a bit more um, edited down. And I absolutely agree with them. That's how, we are designed to have a limited attention span. But something inside me has told me that I prefer these conversations because these are real conversations and real conversations take time. And I remember having a conversation a few weeks ago, and one of the most interesting points came at the end of that conversation. And that's okay for me because, why do we need to have and rush all of these conversations? They take their path. It wasn't that there was no information before, but slow things down, consume less, but enjoy it more. See what the lessons are coming out, and I think people will enjoy it. And I definitely believe there is a space for this type of content. Um, Long form, if you want to call it long form, an hour 10 for most of the conversations that I have. Um, but sometimes it takes time to warm up. Think about when you go for a coffee in the morning, and if you're in corporate, you go and speak to someone. Yeah, the other person doesn't always want to speak. It takes a little while. So why do we need to rush it? There are highlights. There's things that I can publish out the back end of this. There's some very nice AI clips that I'm now producing. Um, but I think the conversation, if you find all of it and you listen to it, I think there's huge value in it. And it gives you that overall picture of that person and the way that they think and why they think that way. And that, to me, is super, super important. Another drink, 1 second. So, in terms of reflecting on my guests, I think there's been a few times where people have surprised me. I think something that keeps coming up is I seem to be able to spot people with huge potential. Um, Maybe not quite in that self belief zone quite yet, but I can see it. I can see that they're very close to that, getting close to you know their zone of genius. Some people say it, connecting with a thing that really makes them tick and come alive. And I've seen that a few times now, and I always try to call it out as much as possible. And uh, I think these people have a bright future ahead of them. That's not to say all the other guests don't, but some of those are already well established guests in their own right in their business, and they're showing up for um, the purposes of helping me and having these conversations. But some of my conversations are people just starting out, and that's very inspirational to me. I'm on that journey as well, but to other people listening, and we don't know who is listening. There's this expression that keeps coming up about lurkers, and I don't really like the term, but it's people that are watching, and you don't get to see all of that in the stats. There's a lot behind the scenes, and people are paying attention, and your message does resonate with people. And I think we shouldn't underestimate like the value of doing that. And I think they're the most surprising things that sort of pop up. Occasionally, I have had my mind blown the way I was thinking. um, I The last one I remember, again, going back to this lady, Michelle, that was talking about homeschooling. She was allowing her kids to be her kids, and she said that she never asked them to say please or thank you to anyone or to kiss, anyone. And it's very, very strange because I do. I force my kids to do it, and I wondered if I was getting things wrong. So I actually just started to back that off a little bit because I believe for my kids, I wanted them always to have politeness because I think that goes a long way. But her saying that and her experimenting and trying that with her kids still meant that they were great kids, but they didn't feel forced to do it. It wasn't false. And it made me question how I was doing things. And um, we start off with the best of intentions. There's not many people out there that do things out of malice. But actually, there's not just one way of doing it. And I think through these conversations, and I would say they're real conversations, that's really the the focus of these for me. It's about having true and honest conversations. Again, I'm coughing and spluttering all over this, and that's real. That's live. Where I am. This is my apartment. This is not a fancy studio. I don't know that I would actually even move into a fancy studio. But if you actually pay attention to the smaller things and how other people are doing it, doesn't mean that we have to take them on board, but it opens up our mind to thinking there are different ways. Again, going into that world where it is fun to try and experiment and see other things, but when we're only consumed about ourselves and we have limiting beliefs or a closed mind, we're never going to change anything. So through that, through being surprised, but also still having a self-belief, it's quite all of these conversations really add a huge amount of value to me, and it's quite ironic because a lot of the reason I was going to do it was for the value for other people, but I learned so much from other people along the way. So I think that's towards the end. I don't see any comments coming through from anyone. If anyone's got anything they want to ask me now, as I say, there's a session tomorrow, 9 o'clock CET time, which will be a bit more around my journey and what I did with Vantage Point and why I did it. Goes into a bit more maybe about the process behind the scenes that you might not know about. Again, if you want to send me any messages, send me like a DM, or if you can attend, that'd be great. And just send that in live. But for today, I think that's it. I'm grateful for anyone listening. Hopefully, you might get to watch this even on the replay. Yeah, it's a nice moment to reflect, a moment to talk about myself, which often I don't do. So yeah. If you want to connect, great. If you've got any other questions and you don't want them to be shared, that's also okay. If you want to be a guest, please just reach out to me. So I've had some people say, well, I'm not that interesting. And I beg to differ. I think we all have an interesting story or something where we are in our journey. It doesn't need to be that you're conquering the world. I think this, as I've said many times, this is about real conversations, real people, and I think that's what people really need. That they can smell that they're being sold to. They can smell that there's an ulterior motive or an agenda, and these conversations can be very revealing, but also make people feel good about themselves. That okay, yeah, there are people out there struggling, even when it looks like they know what's going on, and everything's seems rosy on the surface. And by being honest and open, we don't always have to be vulnerable about these things, but I think people are craving for that, and I think there is that space, and that's why I'm going to continue to do these lives. So if you're interested, just reach out. We can have a chat. It's a very simple process. We just have a chat for like 15 minutes, talk about you, where you are in your life, and yeah, maybe we can have you on as a guest, and even if you're nervous of being on camera, I would suggest that I'm a good host and I can help navigate and make it fun. And I know that's for a number of guests that I've had on have felt the same way. So be reassured. And I think video is also one of those places that you can't necessarily fake. I know AI is getting better every day, but you can't fake, having to blow your nose or, a fly landing on your head, which has happened many times on my video. So yeah, reach out to me. You can just go on my page and you can book some time with me. There's just a link at the top of my bio. Yeah, and we go from there. But for today, thank you for paying attention to me. Thank you for all of my guests. Thank you for people that show up. Thank you for people that comment on my posts. It goes a long way. I can't always thank you, but note that the conversations I have, even if you don't become a guest, really changed my state of mind. When I'm feeling low and I think, oh, no, it's not really working, I reach out to people and I just have conversations, and that brightens my day. So thank you to all of you. I really, really do appreciate you. That's it for today. I will see you tomorrow, bright and early. As I say, any questions, ping them over to me and hopefully I'll answer those tomorrow. Okay, take care. Bye.